Hello, and welcome back to Read Aloud with Dan. That's me. Today, we're reading from Aimé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism. This was translated by John Pinkham from its original French, I believe, right? Wait, whoa. I should know. This version was published by Monthly Review Press, New York and London, 1972. Originally published as Discourse sur le colonialisme by Editions Présence Africaine, 1955. Adapted into EPUB form by me, Dan Simpson, 2025. Copyright. This reads, from a counter-racist perspective, this is nothing other than a mechanism employed by white supremacists, racists, that has been designed to control access to information by non-white people. Wow. It's pretty badass, actually. He's going there already. Holy smokes. And it contains the main work, Discourse on Colonialism, and then there's an interview with Aimé Césaire after that. I think it'll take us a few days, so we'll be breaking this up into a few different parts. We'll be posting them as such. And let's begin. Aimé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism. He says, a civilization that proves incapable of solving the problems it creates is a decadent civilization. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problems is a stricken civilization. A civilization that uses its principles for trickery and deceit is a dying civilization. Okay, so we got decadent. We got stricken and dying. Sounds bad. He says the fact is that the so-called European civilization, Western civilization, as it has been shaped by 2 centuries of bourgeois rule, is incapable of solving the 2 major problems to which its existence has given rise. The problem of the proletariat and the colonial problem. That Europe is unable to justify itself either before the bar of reason or before the bar of conscience, and that, increasingly, it takes refuge in a hypocrisy which is all the more odious because it is less and less likely to deceive. Europe is indefensible. Oh. Seems like he's trying to say Western society is decadent, stricken, and dying. He calls it so-called European civilization, Western civilization, incapable of solving the 2 major problems to which its existence has given rise. The problem of the proletariat, aka the contradiction of your lifetime, and the colonial problem, which if you live outside the imperial core, that's probably the contradiction of your lifetime. Seems like he doesn't like the West. Apparently, this is what the American strategists are whispering to each other. Oh, that's what they're saying. Okay. That in itself is not serious. What is serious is that Europe is morally, spiritually indefensible. Feels like a little bit of whiplash here, but just hang on tight, I guess. And today, the indictment is brought against it not by the European masses alone, but on a world scale, by tens and tens of millions of men who, from the depths of slavery, set themselves up as judges. The colonialists may kill in Indochina, torture in Madagascar, imprison in Black Africa, crack down in the West Indies. Henceforth, the colonized know that they have an advantage over them. They know that their temporary masters are lying. Therefore, that their masters are weak. And since I have been asked to speak about colonization and civilization, let us go straight to the principal lie, which is the source of all the others. What's that? What's the principle? What's that? It says colonization and civilization? With a question mark. In dealing with this subject, the commonest curse is to be the dupe in good faith of a collective hypocrisy that cleverly misrepresents problems. The better to legitimize, rather, the hateful solutions provided for them. In other words, the essential thing here is to see clearly, to think clearly, that is, dangerously, and to answer clearly the innocent first question. What fundamentally is colonization? I'd like to stop here and ask the listener to ask themselves this question. Do you feel like you have a solid definition of this in your head? If someone were to ask you this question point blank, would you be able to come up with an answer that that satisfies you? I sort of feel like I don't. like I, you know. So let's try to learn how to answer that question for ourselves here. He says, to agree on what it is not, neither evangelization, nor a philanthropic enterprise, nor a desire to push back the frontiers of ignorance, disease, and tyranny, nor a project undertaken for the greater glory of God, nor an attempt to extend the rule of law. To admit once for all, without flinching at the consequences, that the decisive actors here are the adventurer and the pirate, the wholesale grocer and the ship owner, the grave digger and the merchant, appetite and force, and behind them the baleful projected shadow of a form of civilization which, at a certain point in its history, finds itself obliged, for internal reasons, to extend to a world scale the competition of its antagonistic economies. Pursuing my analysis, I find that hypocrisy is of recent date, that neither Cortez discovering Mexico from the top of the great Teocalli, I'm not trying to say, nor Pizarro before Cusco, much less Marco Polo before Cambuluc. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. He says, I find hypocrisy is of recent date, claims that he, again, neither Cortez discovering Mexico from the top or Pizarro claims that he is the harbinger of a superior order, that they kill, that they plunder, that they have helmets, lances, cupidities, that the slavering apologists came later, or slavering, excuse me, that the chief culprit in this domain is Christian pedantry, which laid down the dishonest equations: Christianity equals civilization, paganism equals savagery, from which there could not but ensue abominable colonialist and racist consequences, whose victims were to be the Indians, the yellow peoples, and the Negroes. Of course, Teokai, or Kali, I'm not sure, the Huatl word for God house. It's a Mesoamerican pyramid surrounded by a temple. We got this famous, see here, I think it was, I can't remember if this was a painting or what, but there was a giant one right outside what is now Mexico City's main square, the Zocalo. There's a famous painting depicting the storming of the Teocalli by Cortez and his troops, by the same artist who painted that classic Washington crossing the Delaware portrait. Yeah. So there's that story. We got Pizarro before conquering Cusco. Francisco Pizarro arrived in the Inca city of Cajamarca in 1532, where he ambushed and captured the Inca leader, Atahualpa, who was celebrating his victory in the Inca Civil War. All right. So, despite a large ransom being paid, Atahualpa was executed the following year. Pizarro then proceeded to capture Cusco and founded Lima in 1535, though he faced ongoing revolts and conflicts with other conquistadors, eventually leading to his assassination in 1541. We'll skip over the Marco Polo stuff. This word cupidities means greed for money or possessions. I want to throw all that out there. Those are all my annotations. So he says, that being settled, I admit that it is a good thing to place different civilizations in contact with each other. That is an excellent thing to blend different worlds. That whatever its own particular genius may be, a civilization that withdraws into itself atrophies. That for civilizations, exchange is oxygen. That the great good fortune of Europe is to have been a crossroads, and that because it was the locus of all ideas, the receptacle of all philosophies, the meeting place of all sentiments, it was the best center for the redistribution of energy. Then I ask the following question: has colonization really placed civilizations in contact? Or if you prefer, of all the ways of establishing contact, was it the best? Césaire says, I answer no. And I say that between colonization and a civilization, there is an infinite distance. Damn. He says that out of all the colonial expeditions that have been undertaken, out of all the colonial statutes that have been drawn up, out of all the memoranda that have been dispatched by all the ministries, there could not come a single human value. First, we must study how colonization works to de-civilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. And we must show that each time a head is cut off or an eye put out in Vietnam and in France, they accept the fact. Each time a little girl is raped, and in France they accept the fact. Each time a Madagascan is tortured, and in France they accept the fact. Civilization acquires another dead weight. A universal regression takes place. A gangrene sets in. A center of infection begins to spread. And that at the end of all these treaties that have been violated, all these lies that have been propagated, all these punitive expeditions that have been tolerated, all these prisoners who have been tied up and interrogated, all these patriots who have been tortured, at the end of all the racial pride that has been encouraged, all the boastfulness that has been displayed, a poison has been instilled into the veins of Europe, and slowly but surely, the continent proceeds towards savagery. You really can't help but think of Palestine right now, can you? Of course, you know, so-called Israel being an extension of Western civilization and of Europe, and now of the West via the United States. Its so-called unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East. It really makes you think of Israelis and those colonizers. How he says decivilize. I think that's a nice way of saying dehumanize. They've dehumanized themselves in this way. You know? Think of what's required to live in the zone of interest in so-called Israel, while the inhabitants of the land are living in concentration camps right over the wall. Or, maybe if you live in the United States, or in immigration centers across the country, or maybe in reservations, aka concentration camps, or just beyond the rave festival fences where the paragliders are flying in from Gaza. Think about what it takes to live in these places. What's required to live in the zone of interest while the inhabitants of the land are living in these concentration camps right over the wall, or in these immigration centers, or in Gaza. Think of what it takes. Think of how you have to dehumanize yourself every day. And what that does to an entire society. And that helps you to explain why Israelis are the way they are. Why colonizers in the imperial core are the way they are. Why colonizers everywhere are the way they are. They've dehumanized, they've decivilized themselves every day of their lives. And each day the poison sets in more deeply. It's like at this rate, a genocide is just almost likely to occur if we just let, I should say, likely to occur over and over and over and over again if we let Western society continue. That does seem to be that's the case. That's what it all leads to. Reading on. But he says savagery, by the way. It's leading to savagery. And it's not even leading to it. It's just more and more of it. We're not escaping it. Okay, let's read on. He says, and then one fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific reverse shock. The Gestapos are busy. The prisons fill up. The torturers around the racks invent, refine, discuss. So the bourgeois let their stormtroopers run rampant, and now they're surprised to find out, oh shit, shit's hitting the fan right now. He says, people are surprised. They become indignant. They say, how strange. But never mind, it's Nazism. It will pass. And they wait, and they hope, and they hide the truth from themselves, that it is barbarism. But the supreme barbarism, the crowning barbarism that sums up all the daily barbarisms, that it is Nazism, yes, but that before they were its victims, they were its accomplices, that they tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them, that they absolved it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had been applied only to non-European peoples, that they have cultivated that Nazism, that they are responsible for it, and that before engulfing the whole of Western Christian civilization in its reddened waters, it oozes, seeps, and trickles from every crack. Oh shit. That went hard. So yeah, the bourgeois-minded people, they'll get indignant, they'll get mad at the growing fascism, and you're seeing it here in the imperial core. Oh my God, the fascism getting worse. Maybe we'll have to just vote for the other half of the ruling class. Fucking idiots. Anyways, and the bourgeois and the bourgeois-minded people haven't yet admitted to themselves that they have cultivated this rise of fascism here in the United States, even if they vote for the other half of the ruling class. Oh, no, well, I vote for Democrats. They give bombs to Israel. Hold on a second. They're not good either, are they? None of them are good. Neither of them are good. They're the same party. They're the party of the bourgeois class. Figure it out. Reading on. Yes, he says, it would be worthwhile to study clinically, in detail, the steps taken by Hitler and Hitlerism, and to reveal the very distinguished, very humanistic, very Christian bourgeois of the 20th century, that without his being aware of it, he has a Hitler inside him, that Hitler inhabits him, that Hitler is his demon, that if he rails against him, he is being inconsistent, and that at bottom, what he cannot forgive Hitler for is not crime in itself, the crime against man. It is not the humiliation of man as such. It is the crime against the white man, the humiliation of the white man, and that the fact that he applied to Europe colonialist procedures which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the coolies of India, and the blacks of Africa. Yeah, that was what he did wrong in the minds of Europeans, you know. He says, and that is the great thing I hold against pseudo-humanism, that for too long it has diminished the rights of man, that its concept of those rights has been, and still is, narrow and fragmentary, incomplete and biased, and, all things considered, sordidly racist. It reminds me of this atheist period I went through in my life. Not that I'm not atheist anymore. I still don't believe in gods or whatever. But I was a humanist. I was still a liberal. And I still carried settler, colonial, and racist tendencies. And I've worked hard at those things. But the point is, he's absolutely right. I was diminishing the rights of men, I had a narrow and fragmentary, incomplete concept of rights. I had an idealistic and metaphysical worldview. I was a proud liberal. And now I'm embarrassed. And Césaire is effectively saying I had a little Hitler inside me. I was a little Treatlerite, wasn't I? He says, I've talked a good deal about Hitler because he deserves it. Okay, just so everyone's clear, he's not handing it to Hitler, okay? He says, he makes it possible to see things on a large scale and to grasp the fact that capitalist society, at its present stage, is incapable of establishing a concept of the rights of all men, just as it has proved incapable of establishing a system of individual ethics. Whether one likes it or not, at the end of the blind alley that is Europe, I mean the Europe of Adenauer, Schumann, Bidalt, and a few others, there is Hitler. At the end of capitalism, which is eager to outlive its day, there is Hitler. At the end of formal humanism and philosophic renunciation, there is Hitler. Amazing. He goes, Europe, Western civilization, capitalism, so-called humanism, it's a blind alley. The end of the blind alley, Hitler. What are we seeing in Palestine right now? We're seeing a Zionist Hitler doing Hitler shit. And you got the whole of Western society backing Israel. All the leadership of the ruling classes of these different countries. Welcome in, comrade. At the end of Western civilization is Hitler. And it keeps happening. Isn't that wild? It keeps happening. Fucking Churchill, Hitler. I mean, the United States itself is a settler colonial nation. Washington, so-called founding fathers, a bunch of Hitlers. You got to see this. Reading on. And this being so, I cannot help thinking of one of his statements. We aspire not to equality, but to domination. The country of a foreign race must become once again a country of serfs, of agricultural laborers or industrial workers. It is not a question of eliminating the inequalities among men, but of widening them and making them into a law. That rings clear, haughty, and brutal, and plants us squarely in the middle of howling savagery. But let us come down a step. Who is speaking? I'm ashamed to say it is the Western humanist, the idealist philosopher. That his name is Renan. Ernst Renan or Renan. I'm going to go with Renan. That his name is Renan is an accident, he says. That the passage is taken from a book entitled La Réforme intellectuelle et morale. It was written in France just after a war which France had represented as a war of right against might. Tells us a great deal about bourgeois morals. Here we go. This is where it gets really fucked up here. The regeneration of the inferior or degenerate races by the superior races, what does this sound like, right, is part of the providential order of things for humanity. Jesus Christ. With us, the common man is nearly always a declass nobleman. His heavy hand is better suited to handling the sword than the menial tool. Rather than work, he chooses to fight. That is, he returns to his first estate. That is our vocation. Pour forth this all-consuming activity onto countries which, like China, are crying aloud for foreign conquest. Oh my God. Turn the adventurers who disturb European society into a ver sacrum, a horde like those... sorry, I lost my spot. A ver sacrum, a horde like those of the Franks, the Lombards, the Normans, and every man will be in his right role. What is a ver sacrum? Ver sacrum. Ver sacrum. Sacred spring. Sacred spring. Let's see here. A religious practice of ancient Italic peoples. So they were slanty, just like the words versa, especially the Sabelli and their offshoot Samnites concerning the dedication of colonies. It was of special interest to George Dumézil, according to whom the Ver Sacrum perpetrated prehistoric migration practices of Indo-Europeans to the end of the Iron Age and into the beginnings of history, when stable sedentary dwelling conditions had already become general. Ver Sacrum, sacred spring. Again, turn the adventurers who disturb European society into a ver sacrum. Okay. He says nature has made a race of workers, the Chinese race, who have wonderful manual dexterity and almost no sense of honor. What the fuck? Govern them with justice, levying from them, in return for the blessing of such a government, an ample allowance for the conquering race, and they will be satisfied. I don't think that's the case. He says, a race of tillers of the soil, the Negro. Treat him with kindness and humanity, and all will be as it should. A race of masters and soldiers, the European race. Reduce this noble race to working in the ergastulum like Negroes and Chinese, and they rebel. An ergastulum was an underground building on Roman farms where slaves were confined or chained. In Europe, every rebel is more or less a soldier who has missed his calling, a creature made for the heroic life, before whom you are setting a poor worker, too good a soldier. But the life at which our workers rebel would make a Chinese or a fella happy. Bro, what? Holy shit. Does that sort of blow your mind with all this NAFO stuff? He says, but the life at which our workers rebel would make a Chinese or a fella happy. What is that word? As they are not military creatures in the least. Let each one do what he is made for, and all will be well. So, he asks, Hitler? Did he write that? Rosenberg? Who's Rosenberg? Who's this Rosenberg he's referring to? I don't know. He says, no. Renan. Ernst Renan. This guy. It's just European bourgeois thought. right? That's what it is. It sounds exactly like Hitler. So he goes, but let us come down one further step. And it is the long-winded politician who protests. No one, so far as I know, when M. Albert Sorot, the former Governor General of Indochina, holding forth to the students at the École Coloniale, teaches them that it would be puerile to object to the European colonial enterprises in the name of an alleged right to possess the land one occupies, and some sort of right to remain in fierce isolation, which would have unutilized resources to lie forever idle in the hands of incompetence. Yikes. He goes, you know what? You don't have a right to self-determination because you guys have resources and we want them. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like the whole of Western civilization, doesn't it? Oh, we're going to take your stuff. He says, and who is roused to indignation when a certain, and he goes, and no one's protesting any of this. Everyone's okay. No one's protesting. Where's the protest? He says, and who is roused to indignation when certain reverend bard assures us that if the goods of this world remained divided up indefinitely, as they would be without colonization, they would answer neither the purposes of God nor the just demands of the collective humanity. Since, as his fellow Christian, the Reverend Muller, declares, humanity cannot allow the independence, negligence, and laziness of the uncivilized peoples, yikes, to leave idle indefinitely the wealth which God has confided to them, charging them to make it serve the good of all. Oh, that's right, God promised them these things. Where have you heard that before? He says, no one is roused to indignation. I mean, I am, but he says, I mean, not one established writer, not one academician, academic, not one preacher, not one crusader for the right and for religion, not one defender of the human person. And yet, through the mouths of the Sarots and the Bards, the Mullers and the Renans, through the mouths of all those who considered and consider it lawful to apply the two non-European peoples a kind of expropriation for public purposes, for the benefit of nations that were stronger and better equipped, it was already Hitler speaking. What am I driving at? At this idea that no one colonizes innocently, that no one colonizes with impunity either, that a nation which colonizes, that a civilization which justifies colonization and therefore force, is already a sick civilization, a civilization that is morally diseased, that irresistibly, progressing from one consequence to another, one repudiation to another, calls for its Hitler. I mean, its punishment. Well, you might be thinking to yourself, whoa, I live in a nation which colonizes. I live in a civilization which justifies colonization. Therefore, I live in a sick civilization, a civilization that's morally diseased, that irresistibly progressing from one consequence to another, from one repudiation to another, calling for its Hitler. And you might be right. He says, colonization, bridgehead in a campaign to civilize barbarism, from which there may emerge at any moment the negation of civilization, pure and simple. I'm not sure I understand what's happening here. Is that I'm wondering if there's a typo or a mistranslation, or if I did something wrong when I translated this into an EPUB. But he says, everywhere I've cited at length a few incidents culled from the history of colonial expeditions. Unfortunately, this did not find favor with everyone. It seems that I was pulling old skeletons out of the closet. Maybe we'll pause here for the day? I think that's what we'll do. We'll pause here for the day. We'll pick up here tomorrow. I want to thank you for joining me today, reading Discourse on Colonialism by Aimé Césaire. Hope you enjoyed reading this with me. If you enjoy this, if you got something out of this, if you got a couple bucks laying around, and if you want to support my content, please do. Please help keep independent communist media alive. It requires your support. Okay. Thanks for being with me today. I hope to be joined by you next time when we do part 2 of Discourse on Colonialism, part 2. See you then. Love your face.